that's a grand feeling to see your words being spoken by good actors, being directed by somebody who knows what he or she is doing, and you have an audience, and the audience laughs at all the right places, or they say, "Oh," when there's a surprise, and sometimes you make them cry, and sometimes you make them think. And I say, if you can write a play that makes them cry, laugh, and think, then you accomplish something.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'd like to think that I've been successful at doing all those three things.
Welcome back to The Fade. I am your host, Brandon Morgan, and I'm sitting here with a wonderful friend, mentor, and colleague, and amazing writer, Fernando Dovalina. How are you doing today, sir?
Pretty good.
Good to have you here on The Fade, sir. It is a long time coming. Yes, sir. I'm glad you are here. So, for the people who may not know you or know who you are or what you do or why you do it, could you just give the people in the world just a brief intro of who you are?
Brief?
Yeah,
I'm 81 years old. I can't be brief.
Well, that's why we're here. So you can take all the time you need.
You said my name, and it's a Spanish name. I grew up in Laredo, Texas. I was born in Laredo, Texas, which is on the border, Mexican-Texas border. And my parents were Mexican-Americans. My mother, in fact, was Mexican. She was born in Mexico. And I grew up speaking Spanish. I like to tell classes when I teach. My first language was Spanish, but I made a pretty good living out of my second.
Yeah.
And that's true. I got a degree in journalism from the University of Texas, and went on to work for 3 Texas daily newspapers. I worked for the Beaumont Enterprise first, and then I worked for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and then finally I worked at the Houston Chronicle, where I spent 31 years, and then took early retirement and decided that I needed to start writing for the stage. And so that's how I came to become a playwright. But along the way, there are lots of interesting stories. I was pretty naive when I first got out of the University of Texas, because I had grown up in South Texas, where, at least in my city, it was about 85% Mexican-American, Mexican or Mexican-American. And as a result, I wasn't aware of racism. There were some Anglos and maybe 1 or 2 black people in the town. I didn't know any of them. Most of them, the black presence in Laredo was from the Air Force. There was an Air Force base there, so there were some African-American members of the Air Force who were stationed there. And I grew up with the majority, and the majority was Mexican or Mexican-American. So one of the things that happened to me was that I grew up thinking that was the norm, when it isn't, at least in the rest of the 48 or 50. When I was growing up, there were only 48. So so I ended up going to the University of Texas to get my degree in journalism, and all of a sudden I live in a dorm, and it was really a cooperative house, which meant that was for poor guys. And there were 24 people living there, and I was one of 2 Hispanics. So I was in the minority for the first time in my life. But for some reason, those guys who were from East Texas and West Texas and other places, they liked me. And they liked me so much that they ended up electing me president of the co-op in my senior year, which was unusual. I think I was the first racial minority to be president of the cooperative. And so I thought, yeah, that's what happens. I had been an officer in classes before, so I expected that. And then I ended up in Beaumont for my first job. And there was a very racist town, especially against African Americans.
Yeah.
And my first job was to be a police reporter, which meant I would go to the police station and find out about all the murders and burglaries and even fires, and write about them. And the police were very racist. So you get to see how people were often mistreated by the police. One of those cases was, I was at the police station and I heard a child cry. And I heard sounds that sounded like whipping. And there was a jail trustee right outside the room from where the sound was coming. And I asked the trustee, what's going on? And he said, there was a black child, and he didn't use the term black. There was a black child who stole a bicycle, and the detective was beating him up. The kid was all of 12, maybe. And so I went to the managing editor and I said, here's what I heard. What should I do? And the paper didn't rock the boat in those days. And he said, just keep an eye on it. One day we'll do something about it. And so we didn't do anything about it.
That's deep. That's very deep. Man, well, Fernando, that is a very, very tough story to ingest, but very true and needed,
And that was the norm back then.
I believe it. I believe it.
And maybe it still happens.
I'm not gonna say maybe to the just blunt extent, but definitely happens because it's so plentiful now. Like there are so many stories like that. So I'm not gonna say that we may be numb to it, but it's more of a common thread of type of story. It's like it's a story you've heard over and over again.
Thank goodness we have cell phones these days.
Yeah, man.
With a video capability. Otherwise, cops would get away with a lot more.
Everything. So outside of writing for police, were there any other different factors or features that you wrote for?
I had to. The Beaumont Enterprise was a paper of record. So, for instance, Beaumont is a port. So every day I would call the port and get a list of all the ships that were in port. One time I asked the editor, why is this important? And he said, because the prostitutes need to know where the sailors are.
Hey, money makes the world go round.
And then the other listing that I would do was a listing of the births in Beaumont. And there were 2 major hospitals there. So I would call each hospital every day and talk to the nurses, and they would give me a list of the parents. And so the column went something like this: Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, a boy, St. Elizabeth's Hospital, or Mr. So-and-so, a girl at St. Elizabeth's. And so one day, one of the nurses at one of those hospitals gave me a name, and then she said, no, I wasn't supposed to give you that one. And I said, why not? I thought maybe it was because it was an illegitimate birth, and back then we were very sensitive to that kind of thing, and we didn't embarrass the families by publishing their names. And she says, no, that's not why. It's because they're, and she used the N-word. And I said, so what? And remember I tell you I was naive? I was naive. And she said, because you don't use them. I said, since when? Since never. That's the policy of your newspaper. I had no idea.
And this is a paper of record.
Paper of record, but not including African American families. So I said, well, how many do you have? And she had 4 or 5 couples. And I said, well, give them to me. She says, what are you going to do with them? I said, I have no idea, but give them to me. And so she did, and I wrote them down. Then I called the other hospital and I said, do you have any Negro births? That was the term we used back then. And she said, yeah, but you don't use them. I said, give them to me anyway. And she gave them to me. And she too said, what are you going to do? Because even though I only talked to them over the phone, they had become like friends, and they didn't want me to get into trouble, and they were afraid I was going to do something that would get me into trouble. And I knew it would get me into trouble if I published those names. So I waited the whole 8-hour shift. Normally that was the first thing I did, the births column, but I waited the whole shift, and I didn't know what to do. And then I kept remembering what my parents always told us, always do the right thing. So I did what I thought was the right thing. I integrated the births column that night. I didn't ask permission, and I knew that it was a firing offense and that I might pay the price. And not only would I lose my job, but that I might be blackballed from the industry. So it was published with those African-American names in there. And the next day, I came into the office fully expecting that there would be a pink slip on my typewriter. So I go to my typewriter, and there's no pink slip. And I'm waiting to be called into the office of the editor, and there's no call. I had gotten away with it. And many, many years later, when I was retiring, I was interviewed by a young reporter, and she said, what are you most proud of in your career? And I had written a story about my dad, who was a baseball player, and it won several prizes, and as a result, my father and I became closer. And I thought about that, and then I thought, no, it was when I integrated the births column, because I could have lost everything, but I did it anyway. And I said, but nobody noticed. And she said, you're wrong, sir. They noticed it in the wards. And she was right. You know, I like to romanticize this story sometimes. And I imagine in my head that somewhere in the black wards, some young black woman is telling her husband, look, honey, they published a story about our baby.
That's beautiful. So, you know, I'm appreciative of that, whether I'm from Beaumont or not. You know, I'm definitely appreciative.
But Brandon, here's the rub. Here's the rub. I also would write a story about everybody who died in Beaumont. Okay. Or at least I thought I was writing a story about everybody who died in Beaumont. They had given me the names of all the funeral homes to call and their phone numbers. And again, I was so stupid and so naive. There were no black people dying because I didn't know that there were black funeral homes and white funeral homes. And they didn't want me to call the black funeral homes. And so in Beaumont, although as I said, it was a paper of record, black people did not die in Beaumont, Texas, not according to the Beaumont Enterprise. And I couldn't integrate that part of the paper because it would have been too obvious. So I couldn't do anything about it.
But
it changed eventually.
But you definitely did your part. You know,
I did my little part.
Fernando, since I've known you, you are a true man of honor, and it bleeds through you, man. I'm appreciative to know you. I'm appreciative. I
appreciate you saying that.
So, outside of writing for you said the Beaumont Enterprise, correct? All right. So take us to the next step of your journalism.
Well, as I said, I worked for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and then I came to Houston. And back then, this was in the 60s, mind you, there were very few Hispanics in the business. And there were almost no African Americans except for African American newspapers. So I was often the first Mexican American and really the first racial minority to be hired to do this job or that job. So I was, but I didn't recognize that as an important thing. I thought I'm capable of doing these jobs, so I should get these jobs.
Of course.
So I was the first racial minority to be an editor at the Houston Chronicle, for instance. I was the first racial minority to have a regularly appearing column at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. I was the first reporter to work who was a racial minority to work at the Beaumont Enterprise. And I worked 31 years at the Houston Chronicle. During that time, I became involved with the Houston Press Club's annual Gridiron Show. And the Gridiron Show was a set of skits, very much like SNL, but before SNL. And we would make fun of local politicians, local celebrities, state celebrities, and national celebrities as well. They were short pieces. And I tried out and was I auditioned and I was approved to perform, and then later I got involved in the writing. I started writing skits, and that's how I got into writing for the stage.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question. Like when did that crossover happen as far as from journalism and writing into theater, and why theater?
Yeah, that's how it happened. And I didn't know what, and there was all comedy stuff. There was no drama. And when I first started writing, I had no idea how to write comedies, how to make people laugh. I had never studied how to write comedy. So the first few pieces that I wrote, they were not very funny. So I, like any intelligent human being, I said, okay, what do I do about this? Well, you watch what's funny, and you study it, and I didn't buy any books or anything like that. I studied, for instance, the sitcoms on TV. What was funny at the time? Well, there was All in the Family, and Sanford and Sons, and Maude, and all the other comedies, and I studied, the audience laughed at that, I laughed at that. Why is it funny?
Yeah.
And so that's how I learned, and eventually I became pretty good at it. Then one year, Barry is my husband, Barry and I went to New York and saw a play there, and it wasn't very good. And I thought to myself, I can write better than that. Yeah. And maybe Barry said, prove it. So there it was, he threw the gauntlet. And so I decided that when I retired, I would write for the stage, other than writing for the Gridiron Show. And when I did retire in 2000, I started taking some classes. I took a class at Rice University in their continuing education program. And then I took 3 classes at the University of Houston, one with Edward Albee, the Pulitzer Prize winning, Tony-winning playwright, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, among others. And I also took a class with Stuart Ostro in musical collaboration. And he was a Tony-winning producer on Broadway. He produced, among other things, Pippin. Okay. And so I learned about how to write a book for a musical. And I started writing for local theaters at first. And I had some success with scriptwriters, 10 by 10. 10 by 10 is a program where local playwrights write 10-minute plays. And they submit it in a competition. Then the judges select the 10 best, or what they think are the 10 best. And then they are produced. 10 10-minute plays by 10 Houston area playwrights. And I didn't make it the first year. So I was discouraged. But then I took the Albee class and found out what was wrong with some of what I was doing. And then the second year that I applied, I got approved, and my play was produced. And oh my goodness, that's a grand feeling to see your words being spoken by good actors, being directed by somebody who knows what he or she is doing, and you have an audience, and the audience laughs at all the right places, or they say, "Oh," when there's a surprise. And sometimes you make them cry, and sometimes you make them think. And I say, if you can write a play that makes them cry, laugh, and think, then you accomplish something.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'd like to think that I've been successful at doing all those three things.
I can attest that you have been slightly or fully successful in a couple of those.
You've been in two or three of mine.
I can say that I have done at least I want to say maybe 3 plays that you have written.
I think so.
I do remember the very first one that I did was like very, 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 very early in my career. Like when I don't even know if I even knew how to spell theater at the time, but I was definitely doing it though. So yeah, we did the I think it was the 10 by 10 script writers at Obsidian, right? And it was the Eye of the Storm. It was the hurricane plays, right?
Yes.
And it was basically a collection of plays all about like hurricanes in Galveston or that have happened in Houston throughout the years.
It was actually Hurricane Ike.
Hurricane Ike, correct. It was Ike, yeah, and that was a good moment. And then I've done, oh man, Accusation on the Subway, which is one of my favorites that you ever written. And 3 Old Farts. Now that was funny, and since you talked about the comedy, that was definitely funny. But the Accusation on the Subway, like it had all 3 of those things that you said, make you laugh, make you cry, and make you think. Right?
Yeah.
So, and that is like the true formula of your writing. I can attest to that for sure.
Yeah.
Which is also great that I can sit here and say, like, I've done most of these plays that this man has written, which is amazing. So, and I'll never forget, Fernando, I do have to say this on record, like, you are the first person that I have known and met in whatever timeline of my career, and you were like, hey, like, I like your acting and I appreciate what you do, and I'm gonna write a play for you, and I really, really, really want you to do it.
Yeah.
And it actually came to fruition, and it happened, and I just want to say I am eternally grateful for that moment ever. Like, never had that happen. Like, you know, it can happen more, but at that time, like, you know.
Well, there was a reason
early
for that.
Yeah.
There's a reason why I did that. That's because I went to the first Fade to Black program at Obsidian, and you were in the next to last play in Act 2.
Yeah, I was in Act 1. I did a lot of them just that time.
And I had never met you before. I had never seen you before.
We had never met.
And you were in a play called A Sunday in Chicago, or A Sunny Day in Chicago,
sir.
I forget.
Mm-hmm.
And you were there with other wonderful actors whom I love a lot.
And Omar Lewis.
And Dave Osby Shepard, Marcos Mena.
Yes.
I forget who else.
I think we're missing one person.
Yeah.
I can't remember. But yeah.
And I saw you and I thought, oh, there's a fine actor right there.
Yeah.
I need to see him more, and I need to write for him.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll be lucky, and he'll do one of my plays. And then that dream came true too.
Yep, script writers, man.
Three times.
Yep, 3 times. I've done 2 readings and 3 shows. So yeah, it was a good moment. It was a great moment, man. That I was just cutting my teeth at that time.
Yeah.
Like I didn't know which way was up for theater or not. Like I just knew that I wanted to do it, and I wanted to continue doing it. And even if I didn't know what I was doing, I could rectify that the next time if I just kept doing it.
Absolutely.
You know, so that's the only thing I was sure about, is I wanted to do it for sure.
I did the same thing with Dave. Mm-hmm. Dave has this powerful voice.
Yeah.
Just a wonderful voice.
Wonderful.
And I thought, that's the sound of God talking. And so I ended up writing a play called Mysterious Ways. It was a 10-minute play, and it was chosen for 10 by 10.
Okay.
And I had nothing to do with the casting, but the director cast Dave as God. And he was perfect, of course. You know. And a playwright often is so lucky to have good actors who end up playing his or her roles.
Yeah, agreed.
And Dave is one of those, and you're one of those.
I appreciate that.
Other people like Jada August and Dolly Cruz and so many others.
Yes. Well, Mr. Fernando, I would like to get into your patronage of Fade to Black, sir. Like you are like an honorary patron. Like you have been there from the beginning until now. You are a wonderful colleague of our fearless leader, Denise. You know,
yes.
Denise O'Neil. So can we just get into like your background and how you have stayed so consistent with Fade to Black?
Well, we've been to every one of the Fade to Black programs since day one. And when I learned, I don't remember how I heard of the first Fade to Black program. It was at that small theater, Obsidian, in the Heights. And I thought, what a grand idea to do this. And Denise's dream come true. And while we're talking about these things, there are so many dreams that come true, right? And that your dream came true, and my dream came true, and Denise's dream came true, and so many other people. And she's made a lot of dreams come true because of what she's done and what Shabak Enterprise has done. So yeah, I thought, this is great, and how can I be of help? Yeah. And also I thought, if I were young, like Denise O'Neil, I would have a Fade to Brown and invite Latino and Latina playwrights to write 10-minute plays, but I'm too old to do that. It's too much work.
Well, it's something close to that is happening. We have the Sin Murals Festival that happens at Stages. Now, I'm not sure if all of the playwrights are Latinx or not, but it's definitely directors and production team and actors are definitely all Latino. So I don't know if it's on the same scale or not, or all the logistics behind it, but it definitely is a Latin-centered play festival they do about every year. So it's about 3 or 4 shows. I think they workshop one of them. It's happening soon, I believe.
I need to become involved with that.
Yeah, definitely. It's called the Sin Murals Festival. So yeah, you know what, Fernando, I got you. I know what's going on the inside a little bit, so I'll slide you on in.
Yeah, okay.
see if I
Tell me when the
can work
deadlines
some
are.
magic. So yeah, but yeah, like Denise is great, and this is all her idea, and I know that you two worked closely on scriptwriters. I believe Denise is on the board of scriptwriters, correct? Is she?
Or if not, she was.
She was on the board, yeah, one of those. So she was heavily involved in the scriptwriters and the 10 by 10 shows, right. And you have always been there, and you have always been such a great supporter of this Fade to Black. I can say that if you have ever been involved in Fade to Black at any point in time, there's a moment when you meet you here at your wonderful home. You open up the doors to your home for all of our like intro meetings. Like we have like a big Fade to Black party, like, hey, come meet and greet, meet everybody, and that is usually located here at your wonderful home where we are now. And that's just the tradition, right? Like that's just the routine. That's just how Fade to Black works. Like, it will be here and you will be there. We'll have our nice little accoutrements.
Well, I wanted to become more involved. And so when I had my DNA tested, I found out that I was 3% or 4% African American, sub-Saharan African.
Yeah, we all are.
So I told Denise, Denise, I think I'm going to submit a play.
Yeah. what is what's the percentage limit that you have to have?
And Denise said, well, we tried to select African American playwrights who identify themselves as African American. And I said, so is that a no, Denise?
She's good with those words. She's good with those words, man. She is so good with those words. It's pretty much a job at this point. So yeah, Fernando, you've been a wonderful supporter of Fade to Black. I mean, day one. I know I've been there a long time. I feel like an old fart in Fade to Black now. I'm not that old, but
No, you're not. I am.
Denise tell you though, they start, maybe they're not like screaming, but they're making like peeps, right? They make like little peeps to let me know like, hey, something's coming and you may not be able to use these like you always have. So, they try to let me know at whatever time they can.
When people like you tell me that they're growing old, my response is always, if you're old, I'm dead.
Well, I am so thankful that you are not, because
me too.
We need you here to do things and continue helping and supporting us. So what we like to do here on The Fade is a thing we like to call Fade It Forward, right? So it's any type of advice or like ideas or constructive criticism that you would like to lend to an artist or writer or a human or anything in general. Like, you are free to give whatever that may be. It doesn't truly have to be theater centric. Any type of advice or forward giving advice you could give to anyone. So if there's anything you have to give, you can just give it right into the camera right there and give it to those people, fade it forward to them.
One is, and I got this idea from I got this from Edward Albee, the great playwright. He said, do not write about a plot. Write about characters. Why are these people in your play? And a lot of playwrights, they come up with a plot first and don't worry about the characters until after they've figured out where the plot is going. I say, figure out who your characters are. Who are they? An example. I was at a restaurant not too long ago, eating by myself, and a woman walked up to me and looked at me, and I thought, what's she going to do? Is she going to sit down? And she then turned around and walked away. And eventually another man with white hair came in the restaurant, and she sat down with him. But I thought to myself, okay, I know who I am, but who is she? And what if she has sat down? Why would she sit down? What would compel her to sit down? And what would she say? And I went through all kinds of permutations. She would say, I'm all alone, and I need to talk to somebody. Or she would say, I'd like to have an affair, and I like the way you look. Okay, so why does she want to have an affair? And why is she lonely? And what does she want out of me? And me, I know who I am, but let's say it was somebody else. What would he say? Would he say, I'm sorry, go away? Or would he say, sit down and talk to me? Say, she's lonely. Why are you lonely? And maybe he extends a helping hand. Why would he do that? Who is he, and why would he do that? Or if he agrees to have the affair, why would he want to have an affair with a complete stranger? So characters come first.
I appreciate that so much. As an actor, like, there's a very symbiotic relationship between writers and actors. Like, those are all of the questions that I have to ask myself when I read anything. Like, what is this about? Like, why are we meeting here? Why do you need to have this conversation with this person? What is it that you want that you are not receiving that is compelling you to act out in this manner? Like, just listening to you list those questions, it just kept my mind ringing, because those are like literally all the order of things you have to ask yourself as an actor. Like, what is it that I want? Like, what do I want out of this situation that is going to eventually get me to what I actually want? You know, like, how do I push, and how do I make my way happen to get what I need? Or what is it that I need in general? Like, that's the big question.
What do I want as a character? What do I want from the other character?
Yes.
And that's very important. The other thing I would say is come up with a title for your play that invites the audience in.
Yeah.
And of course, by extension and first, invites a theater in, a theater which might want to produce your play. So often playwrights come up with a one-word title.
Yes.
And sometimes they work.
Yes.
Wicked, for instance, works. But only because we know what happens and because it's a familiar story. The one-woman show Wit works as well. I wrote a play once called Wisdom, and it was central to the plot, but it didn't tell the people anything about that. But when the two characters are talking about wisdom, and it's a young man and a grandfather. The young man talks about wisdom that you get with age, and the grandfather poo-poos this, and he says, wisdom is a vastly underrated virtue, overrated virtue, I should say. So I changed the title to an vastly overrated virtue. Doesn't tell you what the plot is about, but it tells you more than wisdom would have told you. Yeah. So again, come up with something that will invite the audience in. I wrote the book for a musical called, a musical about Tammy Faye Bakker, the famous televangelist. And it's probably been my most successful play. A friend of mine wrote the lyrics and the music, and it has been seen in some form or another in 5 states. So I guess it's my most successful play. And so what are you going to call it? Are you going to call it Tammy Faye? Yeah, that's pretty good, because everybody knows, at least back then, everybody knew who Tammy Faye was. But the play was really about how she interprets the Bible. And so I came up with the title, The Gospel According to Tammy Faye. And so that plays off the New Testament, and it plays off her beliefs and her inclusiveness in the gospel. And so that's the title that we went with.
Which is I must say, the best optimal title. It is. Outside of just, like just wisdom or Tammy Faye, right? Like,
in fact, it's so good that somebody who came up with a documentary about Tammy Faye ended up calling it The Gospel According to Tammy Faye.
Man.
It was such an obvious title.
That's good.
No bad.
Fernando, you are a treat to always sit here and talk to, man. I wish we could just sit and talk like all day. But whenever we're done with the podcast, we can just sit and have our own conversation.
That's a deal.
That's definitely a deal. So I appreciate you. I appreciate all that you have done in your own life individually, and I appreciate all that you have done for Fade to Black individually and personally for me. Like you have done things for me unwillingly, and I just want to be appreciative. I just want to be appreciative of all of that, and thank you for the gem you are, man.
And by return, I appreciate what you have brought to my plays. I appreciate what Fade to Black is doing for the community and for the audience, including me. I've enjoyed every one of those. How many have there been now?
Right now, we are sitting at, I want to say we just had our anniversary, so this year will be 12. Yeah, I think we're sitting at around 12 now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm like, man, that's a long time. Like, my son is 11. Like, oh my gosh.
So before you measure time by before Fade to Black and
I
after?
measure time by children or a child. I was like, life doesn't start till 2012, really.
Well, the great thing about Fade to Black, beyond the obvious things that we've talked about, is how many friends I have met and enjoy life because they are in my life. And it's just wonderful.
I've met god awful amounts of people just through Fade to Black. Like, if I never went out and met friends, like, I could solely rely on just those summers, like, truly.
Yeah.
So Denise is on to something. She's definitely on to something.
Yeah, she
and
is.
I'm just like, I'm just gonna keep going and yell Fade to Black in the back as long as I can. So that's what I'm gonna do. So yeah, thank you, Fernando. Thank you again.
Thank you for interviewing me, and thank you to Fade to Black and Denise for thinking that I would make a good subject.
Oh yes, of course. I mean, we just sat and talked about why. So I think it's pretty obvious, Mr. Fernando. You just have to. You were on my list of interviewers. I was like, hey, we got to talk to Fernando sooner or later. There's 2 other people I'm kind of waiting on. See if we can get them sit down in the corner of the Fade and see if I can get it to chat with them. So we just gonna keep it going. Yeah, we will. It will. Denise is very persistent, and I appreciate her for that. So
That's true.
Yeah. So yes. Thank you once again. Everybody, once again, I am your host, Brandon Morgan with The Fade, and this was our wonderful guest, Mr. Fernando Dovalina. And thank you, and we are out. Cool. Can I stop?